All right, here for the Bacchus Show, which I've left open this week since we are asking you to pay us to plug Wayne's book, something like that. How are you doing, Wayne?
Yeah, I'm all right. By the way, before we begin, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you.
Onto an immediate segue. I've noticed in the last couple of podcasts that I'm looking down a lot, and I'll tell you why this is. It may look like I'm being ignorant to Ed. I'm not. The problem is that my MacBook, the iMac, which I normally do the podcasts on, has still got the camera attached to it. So the camera's on the top of the iMac screen, but I'm recording on my laptop. So I'm looking down, and I am looking at Ed. So when it looks like I'm sort of ignoring him, and I'm like this, I'm actually looking at you, Ed, and I'm paying attention to everything that you're saying. Right. But no, I'm first of all, I'm explaining it to you, but for the viewers, they will think Wayne has become decidedly more ignorant, progressively so, as the weeks have gone on. And that may well be the case, but there is also an explanation for it. So viewers, worry not. I still love Ed just as much. I'm still paying as much attention to him. I'm just recombobulating my workspace.
Well, in the editing software I use, just to let people behind the magician's curtain, I can actually change that. There is a magic AI button which makes the eyes look straight at the camera, though I did try it once, and it gave me a kind of Disney effect with slightly too larger eyes. And I was like, I don't like that. It's a bit weird. So I didn't ever do that again.
Yeah,
so today we're going to talk about your new book, which is actually out in the spring, I think I'm right in saying.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, we've got a good lead on this. We've got nearly 6 months of anticipation.
Plugging to do.
Oof. Yeah. So we might as well get on here early.
You got to build demand. Yeah. It's called Football Taught by Matt Busby. And I was just reading the blurb, and it says it is, and I quote, from an author widely regarded as the best Manchester United historian alive today. So what an honour this is, Wayne. The best man. Yeah. Who's your competition for Manchester United history books? There's Roy Kavanagh. Is he still alive? He's still alive, isn't he, Roy?
I know Roy very well. Yeah, I love him to bits. He's great. He's fantastic. And by the way, big help for this book. I'll tell you in a minute why. Everyone's competition. So I didn't choose that. It's not something that's the publisher's thing, and obviously the amalgamation.
Sure. The next paragraph goes on to say, the most attractive, handsome, and
well, my mum sent that one in. No, obviously it's nice, and I read it, and it's embarrassing, but they've got to sell it, so I'm not going to disagree. I'm not going to go, no, please don't say that. It's incredible to even, I've known you a long time, Ed. I've known you before I started writing books. Do you know what I mean? And we've talked all this time. It is genuinely crazy because the thing is, it's a dream to have a book published, and that's the start and end of it. So for people to talk like that is just, honestly, it means a lot. So and I'm glad that publishers do it, because obviously it makes the book look good on the shelf. So
very good. Yeah. All right. Let's get into it then. So out in March 2025. At least that's the plan for the moment. I know publishers can move things around, but on pre-order at all good bookstores and so on. I did notice actually on the Reach Sport website there's a $5 off the hardback if you want to dive into that one. So let's talk about the premise. Why this particular one? What is it? What's it covering? And why this?
Yeah. Okay. So obviously the title is bold, but it's a study of Manchester United's tactical, cultural history going back all the way to day one. I think if you think of when you study United's identity, it's clear that it does all start from Busby. There's a great line used by Sir Alex at some point in his tenure, where he spoke of himself as a custodian of the club's spirit. And that's a very important line, really. It's a very important sentence in United history, because he's basically admitting that, all right, I've done all this, but I'm still only doing it in the way that Matt Busby would have wanted it to be done. So it all goes there. But obviously, there's 70 years of history before Matt Busby. It's interesting to, I wanted to know how much of it is part of that early identity as well. And so the study, I mean, really what the premise of the book came from a sentence Harry Gregg said to me in an interview I had with him 11 years ago. And he said, United is the Hollywood of football. And that was the time that Sir Alex had just retired. David Moyes had taken over. And then over that next year, especially when Louis van Gaal took over, and it was like, the key word was philosophy all summer.
Yeah.
And it was like United are going to be trying different formations. And they were immediately on the first day. They played with a 3-man defence and everything like that. So my curiosity was like, well, what is the United way then? Like, what everyone knows what it is, but at the time there was a lot of talk of Ferguson's reign having ended under not a cloud, but like the bit of a, it was a faltering team. They were in the decline, and they were flattering to deceive and all that sort of stuff. And paired against Guardiola, Ferguson was a bit of a dinosaur, and Guardiola had outwitted him tactically. And really, I was thinking we had that for a lot of Ferguson's reign. Through Wenger was meant to be the philosopher's choice, and even Mourinho and Benitez were seen as like tactical masterminds compared to Ferguson, who was just a force of personality. And I always felt that was unfair because Ferguson was more tactically. You're not the greatest manager of all time without being tactically innovative and smart. But obviously the force of personality and the success was so great that those became the dominating factors. And really, when you look back at Busby, the same kind of things are said. He's such a force of personality that people don't talk about him as a great inventor of tactics or anything like that. So I thought, well, first of all, I wanted to redress those points and try and paint them a little bit more fairly. And that became the sort of stepping stone as I went along with different managers, because obviously in the meantime, I'm doing work on loads of different projects. So that, obviously, I said the gem of that idea came from, genesis of that idea came from talking to Harry Gregg, but then I worked on the Jimmy Murphy book, and then there's so much about United's identity in there. And so all the interviews I was doing is kind of like pick up a little bit as much as you can with everyone that you talk to about what they think the United way is. And then when I did a lot of work with Tommy Ducky over that period, and it was really funny because Tommy, if anyone listens to this ever met him, if they don't, I'll tell you, he had skin like a rhinoceros. He didn't care what anyone thought of him, and nobody thought of him as a tactical mastermind either. But he did reinvent Manchester United. He was the manager who reinvented United. He made them successful, and he gave them identity after Busby. So it was like, how did he do that? Not just, again, through force of personality. So I would sit there and talk to him, sit through the wisecracks, sit through the after-dinner routine. And I said to him, like, Tommy, like, I know that you're not really bothered about this, but through my little way, I want to put out that you're more of a serious football manager. So can we have some conversations about that? And to be fair, I did. He did open up to me on one sit down that I had with him, and he was really good. He talked about, in depth what he wanted from his goalkeeper, from his fullbacks, from everything like that. And one thing that always struck me in that period, and I know that I'm rambling, but I'm allowed to ramble.
Yeah, it's all right.
So the thing that shone through a lot when I was working on the Doherty era was that team got compared, the mid-70s team got compared to Barcelona a lot by the players. And I thought, well, that's quite modern Barcelona, by the way. Modern Barcelona. The Guardiola, this was, 2010 to 15. So you're thinking, okay, tiki-taka, total football. I'm not quite sure this fits. But at the same time, I'm not going to argue with any of the people. So I was like, well, let me take it seriously. Let me look into it and actually see. And what they were talking about really wasn't conservation of the ball. It wasn't really a movement of the ball as such, like possession and everything like that, or cultured passing. It was about energy. And if you look at the total football team of 1974, and it's available on YouTube, you can go and look at it. They hunt in packs.
Yeah,
they're not passing the ball. So their comparisons to what total football was valid. And anyway, so then you start digging deeper and deeper and deeper. And I was like, well, that means that United have got some kind of relationship with that. And again, doing the work for Too Good to Go Down. Keita Asarawa was doing the Atkinson era. The thing that really interested me was that Atkinson and Doherty were both taught by a guy called Jimmy Hogan, who was one of the first football revolutionary coaches. He was one of the British coaches that was exiled around the 20s. And he was one of there's three of them. There was Vic Reynolds, I think it's Vic Reynolds, Buckingham, and Hogan were the three who went abroad, and they basically worked with different clubs in Austria, in Switzerland, in Hungary, and in Holland, Ajax, specifically. So Total Football was basically created by this guy called Jimmy Hogan. It goes back to the Hungarian philosophy of the way that they played. And so
Makers of the 50s,
yeah, exactly. They were the team. Now, the interesting thing with these guys is that they were coached by Jimmy Hogan. And when Jimmy Hogan was having a spell coaching the Austrian players in France, Jimmy Murphy saw him there. Jimmy Murphy was down there. I think it was early wartime. Jimmy Murphy was watching him in training and noticed how different it was. He was training with the ball. It was all about movement and everything. And he sort of vowed to himself that if he went and had a chat with him about his philosophies and everything, and he sort of vowed that if he ever got into coaching, this is what he would do. Busby also shared those ideals. So when Busby gave Murphy carte blanche to work with the youth team, this was the system that they put in place. Now, English football is notoriously insular. It definitely was in the 50s. And it's really, I mean, there's that sort of bigoted, xenophobic...
Little Englander,
Yeah, it's always been there. So in
also a very different sort of philosophy of football. I mean, if you look back into the history of English football, it wasn't always Route 1 stuff, but it was the Scots that were the technical players and the English guys, the athletes, and then Charles Hughes comes along and it's all Route 1 and all that nonsense. But Jimmy Murphy and the Ajax school and all of that is very, very different, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, all that, by the way, is something that I've gone into in the book. I've gone back to day one, to unearthed, to the origins of football itself and the sort of really rudimentary tactics and the idea that everything affects a football philosophy in terms of your climate of where you live. Everything affects your football philosophy. So for United in the early 50s, they were playing that way. They were encouraging movement. They were training with the ball. Everything was centered around movement and working hard and interchanging of positions. I mean, United, even before Busby, it's predated, the United were training players to play in different positions. Now, the great tricks that the Hungarians were doing, how they caught England off guard, was the old formations. I mean, Jonathan Wilson's book explains it expertly, and other places do as well. The great trick is that they inverted a couple of the positions in there, and they confused the defenders. They dragged them out of position, and everyone was caught by surprise. England lost 6-3 at Wembley, and then they went to Hungary for the return and lost 7-1 because they doubled down, thinking, no, we're still going to play the right way. Those pesky cheating guys have got it wrong, and we'll still try and play the same way. Now, obviously, United were already playing that way, but really the English media hadn't cottoned on to that. Now, Don Revie, who played for Man City, and if anyone has studied football tactics will know that he was singularly given the sort of moniker of the Revie plan because he was meant to have introduced the Hungarian style to British football by dropping deeper as a centre forward. But he said on 2 different occasions he credited United, predating this tag that he had. He credited United. He saw United's reserve team play City and play them off the park, and he said they played with the style that I thought only belonged to the Hungarians. Words of that effect. I'm paraphrasing there. So he'd said that before it was popularised, and really the press wasn't cotton on to this. But so really, what I'm trying to say, long story short, for this podcast piece, it's definitely elaborated at in some considerable depth in the book, is that the link that United have with Total Football is so strong because obviously Doherty and Atkinson and Jimmy Murphy all got their football ideology from the same guy. And they're obviously, again, it's a branch and root kind of thing. Their philosophy of Total Football is not quite Ajax's, but it is just as pure as Ajax's because it's just a different variation of it. Like, obviously, Ajax is a little bit different as well. So, yeah.
So it's a book about identity, and I mean, it's one of those terms that's been, feel like in the 90s and the early 2000s when Ferguson was at its most dominant, we didn't talk about identity. We just kind of knew it. And it's really since he retired that we've been searching for what is United's identity, like both playing, but as a club, what does it mean? And the abortive book I started to write 15 years ago now was to look at what it meant as a club, not on the pitch, right? What is this thing? And obviously hide the Glazer protests, but they're intertwined, right? But on the pitch, we've certainly been looking for it. Moyes, Van Gaal, Mourinho, Oli, Ten Hag. You couldn't put them in the same room and say there's any through line there, right? And so, is there something more like? Is there something more that a United coach should be looking for? What's the red line that goes from, or the red thread that goes from Busby to Ferguson to whoever will take us back to the top again? What should it be? Ten Hag has talked about this, by the way. He said we look back at the history, and then he came up with some nonsense on the pitch. But what should that be, and what does your research tell you about that?
Okay, so it is interesting because I think United, and I've sort of drip fed into the podcast, not so much on the nose about, not linking it to the book or anything, but there's a thread that goes through unsuccessful managers, which is a bit easier to identify because Busby and Ferguson are almost misnomers because they didn't, they're not known for that great, and they didn't really talk about football as a great tactical master plan.
No, they weren't obviously identified with a school. I mean, the Ajax school, or the pass and move Liverpool thing, or the Catenaccio in Italy, or whatever it is.
Exactly. There's no
the Guardiola school of boring everyone to death and submission.
They've all got names, and that was part of the thing. For the thing with United is that because he doesn't have a name, it's almost sneered at. It's not considered as part of the intellectualism of football because United's way is just you go, it's chaos or whatever, or it was just Ferguson and Busby. They just won, and there's no tactical cleverness to it. So the thread that goes through the others is really curious because and really only kind of find it out in practice. So with Mourinho, there was never any pretense. There's something about Doherty, about Mourinho, not in so much in philosophy or style, but Doherty, when he first came to United, was very cagey and eventually took the reins off. And United, they went down actually playing good football, which is a weird thing to say, but he took the reins off at that point. He sort of like said, play with more liberation, stop being so cagey. I think he tried to make them more compact, which was not his normal style. But once he embraced it, then things turned around for the better. There was always the feeling with Mourinho that he was a great motivator. He could get players behind him. He was really, I mean, don't get me wrong, massively divisive, as we proved as well. And Doherty was exactly the same. But the idea was that if Mourinho could abandon what we know of his football ideology and sink it in with United's, knowing, I mean, the idea was that, Real Madrid had, in his last season, had broken records for goal scoring. So maybe he could theoretically do that at United. So that's two examples there. The more interesting ones, for sure, are Dave Sexton, Van Gaal, and Erik ten Hag. Now, in Sexton and Van Gaal, there's an argument to say that United, they're the best two coaches that United have ever hired as managers. Certainly Wayne Rooney said that. I mean, it might be a little bit disingenuous because of his fallout with Ferguson, but there's an argument there because of how good they were as coaches. Now, their the other thing that's sort of the theory that supports any success that they should have is the idea that they're all of them were champions of the Ajax style, and two of them are graduates of that in some way or another. Ten Hag and Van Gaal. Now, the difference with how that,
although, sorry, just to interject, because Ajax fans didn't think he was of the Ajax school at all.
No,
really.
No, of course, no, and he wasn't educated in their system as well. So it's key to point that out. What I mean, he's been through that. He's been through that system, so he knows the values of it. So theoretically, again, now the interesting, the thread between them all is that, and why it's a bit of oil and water thing, but you had to sort of wait and see how it would happen with Ten Hag, and I don't think that the injuries did us any favours in that, in assessing the credibility of this theory, which is why it's taken a while for it to sort of settle. So certainly with Sexton and Van Gaal, and you'll see how Ten Hag fits into this. There's an autocratic style where they removed. They had emphasis on instruction and removed liberation and instinct. In fact, Van Gaal and Sexton abhorred instinct. They absolutely tried to remove that from the players.
Right. I always thought Van Gaal was probably almost too good a coach, right? Too much detail, right? He wanted to, and maybe that good is not the right term there, but he had too much coaching in there that he wanted to do, and you can get to the same place with different philosophies, though, can't you? Because I think at times Mourinho's football was fairly dull and conservative, but that was deliberate. It was all about defensive structure and then freedom going forward. I mean, some of his Real Madrid and Chelsea sides scored over 100 goals. Although I don't think anyone would class them as necessarily really entertaining teams, and it certainly wasn't at United, really, despite winning some things. Van Gaal bored everyone to death through something very different. It was like a machine, wasn't it?
Sexton was the same.
Right, yeah.
Sexton was the same. I mean, and that's the point, that I think that they came in as great coaches. There's an idea, or the theory is that they would have all been great assistant managers to someone who was better suited to be like the politician figure of United. Even though Van Gaal wasn't he was probably more entertaining a manager off the pitch than he was on it.
For sure, yeah.
And you wouldn't not get behind him as well, because you had that compulsion to get behind him in a way that you didn't with Mourinho. Like the United job has become a multifaceted thing, really. When Busby retired, he didn't really help matters. I think this may really put this into the United zeitgeist. Is that he retired and he put like a wish list of demands, wish list / demand list for what he felt were the requisite demands of a Manchester United manager. There were things like his age, his authority, all these, like his credibility. He must win. These things that weren't set in place for him, but he put them in place for other people. So he was setting standards, really, and they are really loosely the standards what everyone's been judged by since in some form or another. But Busby himself was responsible for picking managers, and neither Wilf McGuinness or Franco Farrell fit the profile which he himself had declared was the right thing. And I mean, so to get back onto Sexton and Van Gaal, the thing what they obviously, like I said, there was something abrasive there that they don't encourage instinct. And instinct is a massive thing at United, more massive than anyone would really credit. And it really does play into this chaos theory. Like last season when we're having this conversation, and I'm sat on the fence about some things, I'm being more generous about some things than perhaps you are. And now I'm probably more leaning to being more critical towards Ten Hag. Now that he's got a full complement of players, now I can see what the style is more, and it feels more autocratic than it does. You know what I mean? Like when you see the first goal that was conceded against Spurs at the weekend, a couple of weekends ago, players static in positions. While I'm watching that, alarm bells are going off because I'm thinking, unless they're not reading instructions, they're all doing what they're supposed to do, and that's a goal. if that's a systemic error, then that's a major red flag and alarm bells will be going
I think
off.
many of them are, but yeah.
No, yeah, of course. But what I mean is those kind of goals you'd see conceded under Van Gaal and under Sexton as well. And they never showed any inclination that they were ever going to change. Sexton never did. Van Gaal never did. And Ten Hag, we don't know yet. This is the team around him. We are waiting to see that. But
I almost think he's changed too much. And he's a little bit muddled in his philosophy about his principles, as he'd call them, about what his team wants to do. And he smashed two philosophies together, which is a very attacking one and a very defensive one, and got nothing in the middle, quite literally in some games.
But the thing I was saying about the chaos theory as well is that there is an element of that. Now, you can't say that that's by design because nobody plans. The way that it went for Van Gaal when it was his most entertaining was the chaos time, and it's the same under Ten Hag. Now, obviously, that's not by design, but an element of it does tap into the club's identity, and that is the introduction of the younger players and the energy that they bring to the side. Now, there's obviously ways and times and means of doing that, and you only really see the true benefit of that with longevity. So you can only really have the Busby and Ferguson molds to reference this with and say that both of those managers had an uncanny knack of knowing when to introduce younger players into a team. Now, you can actually just put this down to overall wise judgment rather than having your finger on the pulse, so to speak, of a game or a time. But there is something in there. Like when Busby had crisis, he put the kids in. When Ferguson had crisis, he put the kids in. And that did happen with Van Gaal and Ten Hag, but the difference is the style of football. So the chaos is so reminiscent of what we plug into it because it's dramatic. And we say, well, no club does drama like United. So you can take the sort of thin line between hope and despair because that it does connect with something that's called United, but that's not by design. So you have to wait and see if what falls after that is by design. And we never got a proper chance to see that under Van Gaal. We've seen that under Ten Hag, but he's falling back to the autocratic.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's so many.
Ollie was almost closer, right? I know his football was quite reactive, but there was something about the when we react, when we counter, we're going to do it with six players. And there was something that felt authentically Manchester United about that. And that may be me, thinking, well, this is Ollie, a club legend of a player, and obviously everyone wanted him to win. Although, except strangely, a certain section of the internet that was calling him the PE teacher and all of that, and seemed to hate him from the beginning. Yeah, but I think a lot of people who spent maybe of our age, Wayne, who saw Ollie from his first moment on the pitch, and through '99 and to his retirement, who desperately wanted him to win and looked at the better stuff of his football and really enjoyed that, and it felt Manchester United like. Yeah. So, I think that's really fair. Also, I don't think you have to be as old as we are, because there's the younger generation who will have seen Solskjaer's latter part of his career, right? And that was let's say from 2003, let's say 2004, when he may have realised that his playing days were being shortened by the injury. So he started his coaching badges early, and he was picking up that game wisdom and everything like that. So around the same time, Rennie Mullenstein was first team coach, or he was going through the ranks as reserve team, then first team coach. Ollie worked alongside him. When Rennie was promoted to first team coach, there's a really good piece of the coach's voice on this, and in Rennie's book, plug again, but a really good piece on the coach's voice, which is there for free. You can check it out. He talks about flip chart. He says that there are 4 qualities on there: pace, power, penetration, something else. And it was something like, and if all else fails, we gamble. That's the United philosophy as dictated by Ferguson. And that was the kind of system that Rennie used to get in training. It was like everything worked around those core qualities. And when Ollie was learning his coaching, you can see that it's around that same period. And really,
United's style of football in that period from 2007 to 2009, if you consider the interchangeability of the forwards, it's probably as close to the Busby Babes as anything else in United history, in the way that the system moved.
Very exciting team that period. Very, very exciting. I mean, the big regret from that period is that they didn't beat Barcelona in that 2009 final. And I think they went into it. Well, I went into that game thinking they were the better team. And 2011, that definitely wasn't true. But Ferguson built a really exciting, dynamic, very technically gifted side in that period. And the amazing thing was they were absolutely shit from 2003 to 2005. Dreadful.
Suddenly they were in, was it one of those major transition periods? They weren't, I mean, we think that now, weren't that bad in comparison to now.
They were pretty bad when they were getting hammered at the Riverside and dumped out of the Champions League in the group stage and all that. Nowadays, we'd kill to get to the Champions League
for that level
stage,
of poor, But anyway, the point I was making in terms of the reference to Ollie is that obviously lesser quality of player and a lesser quality of coach as well. But there were some things that were reminiscent about that style. People will watch this or listen and they'll go, "Don't be stupid. It was nothing like that." But it was reminiscent. I'm not saying it was exactly the same, but they were. Obviously, nothing's exactly the same.
No, but as I talked about, the threads that you could identify, and I don't think you could with Van Gaal and so on. So, but what makes if we were going to say there's a clear United identity, and we were going to apply it to the coach that comes after Ten Hag, whenever that is, whether that's next week or in the summer or years down the line, what is that?
Okay. That's great. Well, if I knew that for sure, I'd be in a better position than what
you'd be on the phone to Sir Jim saying, "All right, you've got your man."
But my theory on that is that, I mean, first of all, there's no great tinkering with the shape. The shape is generally the most common team formation of the day. They never swayed away from that. So if it was 3-2-5, like it was in the 50s, 4-4-2. I mean, there was a slight deviation with Dockett. He went 4-2-4, which was, I mean, too attacking, really. It was too attacking to really be successful long term. So 4-2-4 or 4-4-2, and then obviously now 4-2-3-1. I don't think that United's identity relies on the formation so much. A lot of people do. They talk about width, and there is that is present in all of those teams. The lack of wingers in terms of like the proper traditional sense is just reflective of the fact that they don't exist in today's game. You might be able to get what I mean, like we've talked about it before, but you can imagine Gareth Bale in that side of this post-Ferguson era if they'd have managed to get him in that period when Moyes, well, that's why he didn't sign. But if they'd managed to get him in that, he was a proper winger who might, and players dictate styles as well.
Well, of course, Moyes thought he had signed him. Thought he'd signed him and Cristiano Ronaldo, and then he turned down Tony Cruz because he doesn't like passing.
There's plenty of things to talk about in that period, but as well, also things like that, which is a period which is really too short to really say definitely. When there are things that are in there that you can definitely say counted against him in terms of like you can clearly tell that he's not, because United's. Again, it's not about tactics on the pitch, it's about personality off the pitch. You could tell that he didn't have the profile, he couldn't command in the same way that Busby, Ferguson, even Mourinho, even Ten Hag in a way that, that you know what I'm talking about. There's a footballing politician aspect to being manager of Manchester United.
It's an aura, charisma, Riz, as the kids would call it these days.
Yeah, you and I, we definitely qualify on that. Count, but you've
tons of riz. Yeah,
I mean, you've got to have that. You've got to embrace the fact that that the club has its own style and its own style. I mean, the three elements that really are the thing for United are youth is obviously the key element. Then the success, which is. I don't know why I'm blanking on the third now because they're in the three key cornerstones. There's three key cornerstones of United's thing. So it may well just be the playing style as well. And the playing style is passing and movement of the players. So the players have always got to be interchangeability to them. They've got to be able to move around, and you can't have static. There's a thing about the energy. I do refer to this like 2 or 3 times in the book, because there are 2 or 3 times where the energy of the crowd actually turns the atmosphere for and against certain managers. For example, Dave Sexton. I'll go back to this just because it's the best example, and some people may even find a Mourinho or Vangelis or Ten Hag example for this. But Sexton had been in charge maybe 3 months, and he tried to impose this style. Ironically enough, he brought Gordon Hill in to make him study videos of Hungarian wingers. I mean, that's the United style, right? So theoretically, it should work. But telling him how to do it when you've got a player as instinctively brilliant as Gordon, telling him how to do it, telling him to defend when the team didn't want them to defend, you're basically disrupting the rhythm. And again, it's a difficult thing because you're inheriting a successful manager's job. He wasn't going in the wrong place, and you're telling the players to do it a little bit differently. So they had a little bit of resistance from that. But there was this jarring element of him instructing the players to do what they could already do naturally, telling them how to do the thing that they could already do and why they needed to do the thing that they could already do.
Yeah.
They had a famous training example of they were going through this corner drill over and over again. Just after he signed McQueen, and someone had joked to Sexton. The players had contrived to do it themselves just to get it over and done with. You know what I mean? They know how to do this, cross it, repetition, get it on McQueen's head, score the goal. And they said something like, why don't we just try the one where we cross it and score and we all go in? Like mocking the manager a little bit. But then when it actually came to the theory into practice, there was a game against Porto, and I talked about this on a podcast a couple of weeks ago, where we'd lost in Porto 4-0. So the game where they had to have the jabs beforehand, but they were playing this same style, very cagey. They couldn't have the reins off or anything like that, and they were all feeling under the weather. They got absolutely spanked. Bring back to Old Trafford, Sexton could not play like that. He had no chance of playing like that because he was chasing a 4-0 thing. So he had to play the Doherty way. So the team went out and played in that style. They were rode onto the pitch. The crowd respected them from the second they got on there, and the players played in the way that was completely alien to the way that Sexton wanted them to play. They played in a way that they knew how to play, and they won 5-2. It was one of the best performances of the Sexton era, but they played abandoning his style. The other notable game from the Sexton era that everyone talks about is the famous FA Cup final in 79. They were 2-0 down with 9 minutes to go. They pulled it back to 2-2 because he abandoned the way that they literally had to just go hell for leather. There was still a bit of muscle memory in there. Still enough players familiar with that Doherty style to just ramp it up, score the goals, get them back into it. Ironically enough, obviously Arsenal go and score straight after that if anyone's familiar with that final. And the reason the players attributed that was Sexton was about to bring on Brian Greenoff as a substitute straight after the second goal to kill it and take it into extra time. But he was famous for never making a decision in haste. He would always say, if you're going to make a decision, no, think about it. So he stopped it. He stopped Tommy Kavanagh, the assistant. He said, no, don't bring him on. Just tell him to wait a minute. Just wait and see how it happens. Literally through that, Arsenal get the impetus and they go through score. If you killed the game for 30 seconds a minute, you're not having them, you're just taking all the tempo out of the game and letting it go to extra time. All the momentum is with you, and United are on a level footing to go. They've taken the sting out of the game. And after the game, Sexton said it was a privilege to be part of such an entertaining game. You could not imagine a Manchester United manager speaking. By the way, a man of class, proper dignity to come out and say that, but a Manchester United manager wouldn't come out and say something like that. They'd say, we'll be back next year, like Tommy Doherty did a few years earlier, and they were, and they won. And the point I'm making in that the Sexton era is the best example of what the abandonment of the United philosophy is, and then plugging back into it, it's there. Like I'm saying with the chaos theory, that when there's nothing else to rely on but the kids, and the kids bring the energy, and the crowd connects with the kids because there's not the anxiety of this is another overpaid foreign player who we're sick of seeing played every single week and underperform. But we're seeing a kid, we're going to get behind that kid. The energy around the stadium is different. It's massively different, and it keys into the performance. And no, I'm not saying there's any rhyme or reason to it because it's bloody chaos. And that's what makes those kind of things hard to analyze. But there's enough evidence, and there are too many patterns of that happening. Even in the Ferguson era, the early, I'm sure you can remember this as well as I can, going back to 89, Ferguson was under a lot of pressure.
Yep.
We had an injury crisis, brought in a lot of kids, and we beat Liverpool on New Year's Day. The atmosphere was unbelievable. He'd never had an atmosphere like that at Old Trafford. And he knew that had come from the kids. And it was a thing that he was already obviously working on that behind the scenes anyway, but it was the first time that he'd witnessed Old Trafford react in that way. And it wasn't the last time, because there are, and I'm not going to talk about him now because there are too many to talk about and it'd take too long, but there are enough evidence, enough examples of Ferguson doing that deliberately through his reign, where he tapped into it, he plugged it, he actually manipulated that circumstance in a couple of very high-profile games. He manipulated that circumstance to happen in order to drive his team up a notch. Obviously, we're talking about a manager then who had such a grasp that those decisions, he wasn't at risk of turning anyone against him if it went wrong. So there is that to Ferguson was cast iron by the time some of those gambles were being made. But the point remains that in those gambles, in those stronger resonant feelings in the last 10 years, that's when we've felt that connected is in those chaos moments.
And there's something about Ten Hag that he's missing most of that. I mean, obviously he's brought some younger players in, although I just wonder whether Garnacho and Colin Langley in particular are just too good and they'd come through with any manager, right? And there's not very much credit there. One of the things that he's missing the aura that goes with having a great Manchester United manager. He's missing the attacking football most of the time. Not always. Sometimes it's too attacking. He doesn't seem to be able to get the balance between risk and reward right. And I do wonder, and I have zero evidence for this at all, whether there's something in the back of the minds when they're thinking about a new manager, and because all the prospective options were not quite fitting the bill, were they? I mean, the favourite appears to be Thomas Tuchel. At least he's the one that's talked about most, and a manager who has sort of brilliantly organised his defence over and over again, and then create all these teams that can't create chances and can't score goals.
Yeah.
Just repeat, rinse and repeat, and he gets you almost there. I mean, of course, he's won big titles and Champions League and all of that kind of stuff, but his best moments seem to have come in the cups. And then you could go down the list of all the other options, and there are weaknesses there too. All right, well, the book is out in the spring, unless the publishers pull a fast one on you, but it appears that locked in. You can pre-order it now. Football Taught by Matt Busby, by the greatest Manchester United historian alive today.
I'm still alive, so that's a good thing.
Still alive. All right. Thanks, everyone. This is a bonus NQAT extra that's open for everyone and on YouTube as well. Enjoy, and thanks a lot for listening, watching, and being part of the community. All right, Wayne, we'll leave it there. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for the plug.